history, and most notably in modern times, being curvy has become synonymous with female beauty. However, all curves are not created equal. They come in many shapes and sizes. Some are not even visible to the average passerby, and some do not belong to women at all. It's a common condition, easily disguised, and it affects 3 million men and women in the US every year, according to a 2016 MayoClinic.org article. I was blessed to be able to hide the effects of my scoliosis. However, in its most severe forms, it can be disabling and come with a life of chronic pain and physical deformities. According to Dr. Patricia L. Pivanka in 2014, scoliosis is a progressive sideways curvature of the spine. It comes with several symptoms and can be treated with braces or surgery, but it has no cure. Scoliosis is typically genetic, according to Dr. Pivanka. In a 2013 Swedish study, it was found that patients who had family members with scoliosis were more likely to develop the condition. And it was also found that those who had family members with scoliosis had curve sizes of greater degrees. This linked family history of scoliosis with greater curve sizes. Now, scoliosis typically begins with a weakness in the ossification centers, or bone formation centers, in one side of the spine. And this leads to a malformation of the vertebrae in a 3D pattern. As a result, the neighboring vertebrae bend out of position and create a sort of corkscrew effect or chain reaction. And as the body tries to compensate, it shift and become misaligned, leading to life in a rather curiously shaped body. Now, scoliosis is the leading orthopedic problem in school-aged children, according to a US Newswire Washington article from 2010. 2 to 4% of those aged 10 to 16 have the condition, and it's more prevalent in girls. The condition is also more prevalent as you get older. Adolescent idiopathic scoliosis, or scoliosis that develops out of the blue not as a result of a former condition or disease, typically begins with a trip to the doctor when a child realizes they have a trunk deformity, and this can be a protruding hip or rib bone or waist asymmetry. And this is usually discovered at a school screening or by a family member, which was the case for me. Scoliosis affects the alignment of the spine and the shape of the torso. It can be classified as either mild, moderate, or severe, depending on the degree of the curve or the Cobb angle. Now, my scoliosis is moderate, and I'll try to let you guys see this here. This is actually an x-ray of myself when I was 17, so yeah, good times. So that's my curve. And I did have to have some treatment for a couple of years, but luckily I stopped growing, and I'm short, so whenever I stopped growing, the scoliosis stopped progressing, and that's the case for many people. Now, the goal of treatment is to manage the condition rather than to cure it. Those with mild scoliosis are typically observed just to ensure that the curve doesn't progress any further, while those who have moderate or severe scoliosis are typically braced or undergo spinal fusion surgery. Now, the history of bracing and surgery is quite lengthy and goes as far back as the 5th century BC, according to the US National Library of Medicine in 2009. Original braces were not removable, and they were typically plastered straight onto the patient's body. Now, this is before the transition to removable braces that were worn 24 hours a day. Today, braces are typically only worn at night, and they are made of a lot lighter, form-fitting materials. Now, the Providence brace, which you can see here, is the one that I wore for several years, and it takes advantage of lateral and derotational forces and pushes the top of the curve to the center. So essentially, it straightens your spine while you sleep to discourage it from getting any worse, as you do most of your growing at night. Now, the most recent breakthrough in bracing technology is non-rigid bracing alternatives. The SpineCore brace, which is essentially like a harness, and you wear it 24 hours a day, and it allows for a lot more movement. It influences factors of postural disorganization, muscular dysfunction, and unsynchronized spinal growth, which Charles Rivard and Christine Colliard of St. Justine Hospital in Quebec theorized are the main factors that affect spinal deformity. Now, spinal fusion surgery is typically recommended to patients whose curve has exceeded 45 degrees. During this procedure, the joints are removed between the vertebrae and they're loosened up. After this, they're roughened up or scraped away in order to encourage the formation of new bone. Now, this new bone forms and fills in the gaps between the vertebrae, thus fusing them together and straightening the spine. In the meantime, however, metal implants are put in place as placeholders, basically to hold the spine in place while this new bone is forming, which takes quite a long time. The recovery time for this procedure used to be long and arduous, but it has gotten significantly better as time has gone on. The methods of treating this disorder have advanced in the past years, just as the knowledge about the condition has. Scoliosis was once a painful sentence, but now with better management tools, patients are allowed to live a lot easier life. It's a condition that's easily covered, yet it affects many and will continue to affect people for years to come. This progressive sideways curvature of the spine leads to life in a misaligned body and years of treatment for some. However, life for patients has never been better. Scoliosis is common, but uncertainty about it doesn't have to be. And hopefully, with a greater understanding of this condition, we can all come to appreciate curves of all shapes and sizes, even those we cannot see. Thank you.
All right. So, how many of you have one of these? It should be everybody. We can't live without them nowadays. But did you know that cell phones have 18% more bacteria than the average bathroom seat? Kind of gross. We don't wash our cell phones that much, which, I mean, that's explainable. You don't really get them wet. So, about cell phones, they really started around 1970, 1973 in specific. They have a rich history for that about 40-year period, going from a brick to that small thing. There's been many advances. They've gotten smaller. They lost the antenna and the buttons and everything that the original cell phone had. And there will be more advances to come. The iPhone X just came out. It's about $1,000, and really it's just an iPhone. There's not much different about it. Now, before we start, we got to go back to the future. Yeah. Fun? Yeah. So, the year was 1973. Motorola head engineer. What's his name? Don't remember his name. Anyway, so the Motorola head engineer. He made a project to make the first cell phone, and ironically, what he did was he called a different different telephone company and said, "Hey, I'm making this call on a cell phone. What are you doing?" So that was kind of a slap in the face to everyone else, but Motorola is really the figurehead for pioneering the first cell phone. There weren't that many other advances until the 1980s, so future. So right here, right, that one. It's the Motorola Dynatec 8000X. A little bit of mouthful, but retailed for about $4,000, which it's a little expensive for that big old brick. It was designed for the rich and the famous and the lavish, people that could spend $4,000 on a cell phone. So that many people didn't have them. They didn't have a lot of cell towers around, so the signal wasn't great if you went to like Mount Airy, which nowadays you can pick up a signal pretty much everywhere. And then other notable cell phones in the era. There's a company called Mobria, which we now know today as Nokia. They had the Senator and the Cityman released in 1982 and 1987 respectively. And that's the Senator and that's the Cityman. And they look a little bit like home phones we have nowadays, but move to the future, things get more advanced. So 1990s, they look a little bit more like cell phones we've seen today. So over here, we have the Nokia 6110. There's not really a cool way of saying that, but And a calculator, calendar, and a currency calculator. Wow. And then there's the Motorola StarTAC, which, flip phones. You had one of those in elementary school, you were the coolest kid on the block. And then the BlackBerry, which was released in 1999. Those of you who know BlackBerries, they're like the businessman's phone. They're like all work, no play, no fun. Just, texting and emailing and always on the clock at the office. So after the 90s, you have the 2000s. So right here is the Motorola Razr, 2004. I'm sure everyone recognizes that phone because that was my first phone. It was the flip phone. You could play Snake on it. It was fun. but you know, there's other cooler things out there. And then here's a BlackBerry. It's the 7270. It was released in 2005, and that's kind of the BlackBerry that we all recognize today as like the business phone, the one that we all see. Hey, the president used to have one. I don't think he does now. I think it's a different one, but it used to be that presidents carried BlackBerries because they were harder to get into. A little fun fact there. And then the phone that revolutionized the game, the iPhone 3GS. Now, I'm pretty sure everyone here either has an iPhone or an Android, and sorry, Android users, iPhone takes the cake here. They were the first people to really release one of the most technologically advanced smartphones back in 2007. Steve Jobs revolutionized the world when he showed a phone that could, you know, take pictures, it could play music, it could call, text, email, everything there. It's kind of amazing, in my opinion, like back when a phone was, like just 30 years, we went from a phone that you could only call people and it had like an 8-hour battery life, and then like now we have this that can do almost anything, and then like 7 years later, you have the world in your hand. It's pretty cool. So, in conclusion, these are just two other phones. There's a case phone, 1980s, and then a Motorola flip phone. Cell phones have experienced explosive growth throughout the years. They've really grown more than any other technology we've had. I mean, like computers and cell phones together, they've, like from the 1950s till now, just the rate of speed that we've expanded them, just outrageous. Like I said, there's been many advances, and they've gotten a lot cheaper. So the iPhone X may be $1,000, but it can do a lot, and it's not $4,000 and a briefcase you have to carry around. Thank you.
Okay, in 1976, there was a game titled Death Race by XFI, the developer, that was released, and it is now known as the first violent video game ever created. It was just you in a vehicle running over some gremlins that were kind of resembling like stick figures, which people back then, they didn't really know what we would have today, so they thought that was horrible. They threw that out of arcades, they threw the entire machine out in protest, and now today we have shooting at people, running over others with cars, and it's just a whole lot different nowadays. And in a survey I posted a few weeks ago, or a few months ago, I learned that about 50% of you play video games, and for the others, the first thing you want to know is what makes them violent, and then some examples of them. Okay, so AAA title video games, which are video games with the highest level of budget, advertising, and promotion. Those are what I talked about earlier, probably just shooting at people or running them over, but more gruesome video games do exist. Like Mortal Kombat's one of them, where like you can just rip entire bodies in half. Decapitations, maybe like something with melee swords, just slicing people in half. But for the AAA title games, that would be Call of Duty, Grand Theft Auto, Battlefield, etc. Those are probably something that you've heard of. And so the question that arises from this is, should we let our children or teenagers or whoever get their hands on this? And that was sort of answered in 2005, the Supreme Court case, Brown versus Entertainment Merchants Association, which ruled that you cannot ban the selling of video games as it is part of free speech as is any other medium. So first let's talk about some positive effects. One of those would be problem-solving skills. According to the American Psychological Association, those that played RPGs, which are role-playing games, they did better in school, they had better grades, and part of that's from problem-solving skills like math. They did a lot better in math. They also get better in emotional resilience, maybe from the frustrations from failing over and over again, which especially applies to violent video games, because video games as a whole is where most of the positive effects go from, and then violent video games is where you can see the negative effects. And motor coordination, of course, from the sticks, with your controller. Motor coordination, of course, comes along with that. But for negative effects, short-term aggressive behavior is a big one. And a study done by Christopher Bartlett, who is a psychologist, had them play Mortal Kombat. And then they were asked to give out hot sauce to a student who did not like spicy food. And they found out that people who played the game gave out a lot more hot sauce because, I don't know, maybe they were trying to burn his tongue off because they were mad at the game. But the control group, they did not put anywhere near as much hot sauce on there. And if you think that's a little out there, there are a few other studies that show similar things. And something that supports that is Dr. Brad J. Bushman. He found out that TV, violent depictions on TV, that's passive, so you're just watching it happen. But if you look at a video game, or if you play a video game, you're actually controlling who's shooting who, who's running over who. You're controlling that, so you're more likely to do it yourself. And there are two others that have shown correlation, but correlation does not always imply causation. Like bullying patterns, they found out that those who have bullied or those that claim to be bullied, those are more likely to play video games, the bullies themselves. But you could say that those that bully are more likely to be aggressive and play video games in the first place, especially those that are violent. And then mass shootings, they do not happen quite enough, fortunately, for us to study, so you cannot determine a link between the two. And some of today's most popular video games contain several depictions of violent events that contain both positive and negative effects. And more research still needs to be done because you can't really determine a link or anything definitive off what we have shown because there's nothing that can determine a cause, which is why I didn't take a definitive stance on this and it's informative. Thank you.
Today, I will be sharing some of the positive and negative impacts technology has on our society and how it influences the way we communicate with each other. I'll start by explaining how it's impacted society positively with how we receive daily news and how businesses function. Then I'll discuss the negative impacts it has on our society, such as the increase in cyberbullying and how it has become a dangerous distraction. But before we get into my speech, I have 3 little facts about technology that I'm going to share to help give you guys a better understanding of how much technology really influences our lives. So the first one is that in 2012, 17 newborn girls were named Siri, and if that doesn't tell you how much technology impacts our lives, I don't know what does. The first VCR was created in 1956 and was the size of a piano, so clearly we've come a long way since then. And the last one is when the first iPod prototype was shown to Steve Jobs, he actually dropped it in an aquarium, and he used the air bubbles it made to prove that there was still empty space and that it could be made smaller. So technology has had positive influences on our society and has been beneficial to us through the way we receive daily news and the way businesses are run. The fact that we receive daily news more efficiently now is a direct effect of the positive influences in technology. I'm sure we've all used social media at some point to catch up on news throughout the day just because it's the most efficient way. According to an article by the Pew Research Society, as of August 2017, 67% of Americans report that they get at least some of their news on social media. And according to this graph, Twitter, YouTube, and Snapchat all had an increase in their audience that gets news on that site in 2017. And Twitter had 74%, YouTube had 32%, and Snapchat had 29%. These increases have been very beneficial for these businesses due to the investments they've made over the last year in developing their news usability. So clearly it's paid off as more and more people are beginning to use technology for news. Moving on to the positive impacts technology has had on businesses. I'm sure most of you recognize at least one of these logos, and that just goes to show the impact advertising has on consumers and brings up the idea of brand awareness, which is the extent to which the consumer recognizes a specific brand. Businesses create brand awareness by advertising their products, which allows the consumer to constantly be reminded of their products. And with the introduction of technology into the world of business, it's allowed companies to reach a wider audience and improve their marketing. By creating advertisements that can be seen on TV, online, or even heard on the radio, it gives companies a better opportunity to continue to engage their audiences and ensure they're reaching their target customer. These factors, from how we receive daily news to the way that businesses can reach an audience, is all made possible by the help of technological innovations. However, technology has also created some unexpected consequences. such as the increase in cyberbullying and how technology has become a dangerous distraction. In 2014-2015 National Center for Educational Statistics, they indicated that nationwide about 21% of students ages 12 to 18 experienced cyberbullying. When an individual shows any activity on their social media, it automatically creates a public record or a reputation which is accessible to anyone, including future employers or even colleges. Therefore, it's important to remember that cyberbullying impacts not only the lives of the person being bullied, but the person who's doing the bullying as well. Looking at the statistics here, 21% of teens have been victims of cyberbullying, and 19% have cyberbullied others at least once in their life. By looking at these statistics, we can see how big of an impact it has on our society, and hopefully by making these statistics public, it will encourage people to think before they post. Moving on to the last negative impact of technology. The biggest distraction caused by technology is for sure texting and driving, but that's not the only one. According to an AT&T survey, 97% of teens say texting while driving is dangerous, but 43% admit to doing so. This goes to show how heavy an influence technology has on our lives daily. It's important that people continue to become aware of these statistics in order to caution them on the negative influence of technology. Although, as we have seen, texting and driving is a huge distraction, other distractions caused by technology exist as well. It's not just the millennials who are heavily influenced by technology either. It's been discovered that parents are becoming just as easily distracted. A Time article from 2016 showed that researchers were considering the fact that there is a sensitive period in which maternal care needs to provide consistent patterns. However, because parents are so easily distracted by their technology, babies are not getting the necessary attention they need at critical points during their development. This can have lasting effects on the child, including mood disorders such as depression and anxiety. Both cyberbullying and distractions are negative impacts of technology and show that our ability to communicate effectively with others is lacking. So in conclusion, society has clearly been impacted with the introduction of technology, both negatively and positively. With technology, people can receive news much more efficiently. Along with that, technology has allowed more businesses to succeed with advertisements on TV or the internet. This has created a brand awareness for them, ensuring that their target audience will remember their product. However, with the increase in cyberbullying and technological distractions, it's apparent that technology has negative impacts on our society as well. With so many new technological advances for the future, such as self-driving cars, virtual realities, and drones, who knows what the future of technology will be like. One thing is for sure, though, technology will continue to advance for years to come, and it will become increasingly important that society learns to not let technology have too much control over our lives.
You have heard about the 7 wonders of the world. Great. So today I will be talking about one in particular. It is located in the country of Peru. Peru has many great things to offer, from food to the great scenic views, one of them being Machu Picchu. I will be mentioning facts about the location, a bit of history, and some activities that are offered there. So Machu Picchu is located in the Andes Mountains in the Cusco, Peru area. So the red shaded part is where Cusco is, and the country is Peru. And it is a 15th century Inca site which stands 2,490 meters above sea level and 70 miles northwest of Cusco City. Machu Picchu contains many steps and walls made perfectly from stones. Take note that back then, there weren't any tools to structure or make stones perfectly, so they made these stones from rocks themselves. And they fit perfectly together, and they use rock to carve rocks. So the stone work makes all parts of Machu Picchu accessible. For example, the steps. They lead you to all sorts of parts of the mountain. The terraces are like steps, but on the mountain they're actually really big, so you can't really walk on them. You can, but it's not like you can climb them. So it's small little steps between those steps. And this is like the secret as to why Machu Picchu was kept so intact. It kept the mountain from sliding off the to keep city from sliding off the mountain. It provided a place for agricultural activities along with the reasons. It was also built to cope with the 80 inches of rain that it received annually. So before arriving to Machu Picchu, you have to get to a place called Aguas Calientes, which is, it translates to hot waters, which is, it's named that because it has hot springs that people can bathe in as if it were a hot tub. So in this picture right here is where like everybody would just go in and relax. And it wasn't like electronically, like, you know, it was natural. It was really natural. And it was a small city outside of Machu Picchu, and it is about 8.9 kilometers from Machu Picchu. So, yeah. And the city contains many hotels for backpackers, so it's like a one-night stay. Like, you don't stay for continuous nights. It's for people who like to hike and go on the Inca Trail, the famous 3-day Inca Trail. Like, it's, you know, you camp out there. And speaking about the Inca Trail, it combines various mountain scenery, a cloud forest, and a variety of Inca paving stones, as well as tunnel and tropical jungle. So here you see the tunnel, and over there you see the cloud forest. It has a lot of scenery, and it takes 4 days to complete. It starts at 82 kilometers from Cusco to Aguas Calientes, and throughout those times, you camp a lot, and you have to get very used to the wilderness. So to conclude, here's a picture that my aunt personally took of me, and on this vertical side is to show you why Machu Picchu is so wonderful to me and why it amazes me, because if you see, it's like a face. So that's the eye, and that's the big nose, and this is small lips and the pointy nose and the pointy jaw of the Inca. So that's why it's so amazing to me, and that is why it is one of the 7 wonders of the world.
29 years ago, 3 dirty surfer dudes from Long Beach, California, decided to form the band called Sublime, which I'm a big fan of. I'm sure that at least a few of you have heard of the band, but if not, the purpose of this speech is to inform you about the history of Sublime. Sublime worked their way, although not being very popular, when they were first creating music until after they were already done. They became one of the biggest reggae bands in the United States. So, Sublime is a ska punk trio consisting of Bradley Nowell on guitar and vocals, Eric Wilson on bass, and Bud Gaw on drums. And ska, if you haven't heard of this music genre, it's similar to reggae, a little more like poppy kind of. It's more like fast-paced, and then they also add some punk elements. So those two genres, punk and reggae, don't really go together, which gives Sublime a really unique kind of style, and there's not a lot of other musicians out there kind of doing what they were doing. So therefore, a lot of the fans, including myself, like to not really use the word genre, because, you know, good music's good music. You don't have to put genres on music. So to learn about the history of Sublime, you must first know about what came before Sublime. According to Rolling Stone magazine, Eric Wilson and Bud Gaw grew up in the same Long Beach neighborhood as children. Eric's father, Billy Wilson, taught the two boys how to read music and play the drums. These two guys formed a band in high school, and they formed a band with Michael Happel, who later ended up becoming the manager of Sublime, called the Juice Bros. And then they met Bradley, and he introduced them to reggae because they were only a punk band in high school. They didn't even listen to reggae. And Bradley was a big fan of Bob Marley, so he kind of got them into Bob Marley, and they sort of meshed together, making this ska punk. And Bradley had dropped out of the University of Santa Cruz to start doing music. So, Phoenix New Times says that the trio mainly played gigs at small clubs and parties during their early years. Music venues didn't want to play their music because they didn't like them. They didn't like their music, they didn't like them as people, because they weren't very good people. So Sublime decided, well, we'll just make our own record label. So they created Skunk Records, and they started telling music venues, oh, we're Skunk Record recording artists. So they lied to the music venues to get in and kind of build credibility. And this actually worked really well for them. And they started playing more shows and then eventually worked up to bigger shows. In February of 1990, Bradley adopted an abused Dalmatian and named him Louie after his grandfather. Lou Dog ended up becoming the band's mascot. And if you watch some old concerts of them playing, you can see the dog running around the stage because they just let him do whatever he wanted. In late 1990, Happel told the band that they could record in a studio when he was going to school. So them being a bunch of dirty surfer dudes, they decided to break into this school that this guy was going to and just start recording music from midnight to 7 a.m. And yeah, you can actually hear in their two first official tapes and record, you can kind of hear they were kind of experimenting. So the stuff they came up with was just kind of finalized. They couldn't, because they didn't have a studio to fix anything. So this eventually led to them with their first official cassette tape called Job Won't Pay the Bills. As stated by Sublime Stories, which is a documentary on YouTube that's really cool, Sublime began gaining a large following in California, and in 1992 the band released 40 Ounces of Freedom, which is this album. At first they were only selling albums at their shows, but eventually they started to blow up because a rock station called KROQ started playing Date Rape, which is one of their more popular songs, and this helped them to sell more records. In 92 and 93, the band signed with MCA Records and released their second album called Robin Hood. This album sucked. No one liked it. It was a failure. Basically, they had a whole lot of weird, like, they took speeches and made it into music. I don't know. It wasn't good. There's like 2 good songs off of it. During 94 and 95, Sublime spent the majority of their time touring, and in late 1995, they co-headlined for the nationwide Vans Warped Tour, which I cannot imagine Vans Warped Tour playing reggae anymore today. They actually got kicked out of it for a week because they were a bunch of drunks and all on drugs, and they all decided to bite for the dudes at the concert. They got kicked out. So after their time touring, the band was pressured to release a new studio album. So they began recording what eventually became their self-titled and final album. And these guys actually didn't want to record anymore. They just wanted to play music and have fun. They finished the album just before Bradley died of a heroin overdose on May 25th, 1996 at a motel in San Francisco, California. This was just 7 days after he was married and only 2 months after his son was born. Just like Nirvana, when Bradley died, Sublime died. In 1997, Eric and Bud formed the Long Beach Dub All-Stars, but broke up in 2002 because they all decided to make a vow not to do hard drugs, and they all broke that vow. They didn't learn after their best friend died. Eric and Bud played in different bands here and there, but in 2009 they brought back the Sublime name by teaming up with a man named Rome Ramirez. They played under the Sublime name for a year until Bradley's estate challenged them because they were not cool with them using the name Sublime. So there was some legal trouble there, and eventually they changed their name to Sublime with Rome. And they have been that since then. Sublime with Rome continues to play shows nowadays. They have 2 albums, and they're not that great. Nobody likes them. People hate Rome. Even though he's a nice guy, and he has nothing but respect for Bradley, people despise him. I don't know. So most Sublime fans just don't even acknowledge Sublime with Rome at all. And even though Sublime wasn't the most popular band when they were first getting started, they have influenced many new artists, and their legacy still lives on 21 years later. especially through bands like the Dirty Heads, who were influenced by Bradley Home. Thank you.
All right, so I did my former speech about Brian Burlsworth. All right, so let's get this. Okay, so basically the reason why I picked this topic is because my senior year of high school, for football, I won the Burlsworth Character Award for Outstanding Character and Scholarship. And it came with a book, so yeah, my coach told me to read it, and it basically told me a lot about it. So let's learn about it. All right, so Brandon Burlsworth was born on September 20th, 1976 at Boone County Hospital in Harrison, Arkansas. This is the hospital. It's a museum today, but that's what it looked like back in the 70s. All right, so his family. Okay, so Brandon, he has two older brothers. Marty is 16 years older than him, and then Grandy, his other brother, is 13 years older than him. All right, so his parents, Leo and Barbara, they met in the late 1950s, and they split when Brandon was just 2, sadly. The main reason why, according to the book, was his father had a drinking problem, and his mother got tired of it after 20-some years ago. All right, so Brandon's childhood. Okay, so Brandon went to elementary school 8 miles south of Harrison, in another small town called Valley Springs. And according to the book, when he went to elementary school there, it was really not much there, more than a convenience store. I think they had like something else there. It was just a real small town, basically, like the town he grew up in. All right, the church's impact on Brandon's life. Okay, so he grew up, growing up, the church had a huge impact on Brandon. He had a very close bond with his pastor, Rick Watts. And according to the book, he got involved in a program called Super Church, an all-day Saturday activity, which the community outreach trying to get as many kids to come to the church for a day of fun. The church also picked up the kids on a church bus. The Super Church lasted the majority of the day, usually ended around 1 p.m. Brandon usually stayed longer, and he played football with some of the kids and the younger church and the younger pastor, in the churchyard. Okay, here goes the sad part. Okay, so Pastor Rick Watts moved to another church when Brandon was 13. The book doesn't say why, but I guess he found a good opportunity, more money, I guess. All right. So this is the church where he, in Harrison, Arkansas, where he grew up and he got close to God. Okay, so the Baby Ruth lead. Okay, so when Brandon was 10, he started going with his brother Marty to Marty's Baby Ruth Little League games, practices. And Brandon would often practice with them. With that, his brother saw potential in Brandon, so he started to train him. Brandon decided to play when he was 12. Brandon was much bigger than almost all the kids. So his older brother worked with him to help him lose some weight and help him get in shape. By the time he was 14, he was a competitive pitcher. He still needed to build up his arm strength. The Baby Ruth League was a travel league, so they traveled everywhere and played all over the United States. Okay, so here are his high school years. For high school, Brandon went to Harrison High School, the home of the Goblins, now the Golden Goblins now. So he played travel ball until his second year of high school. His brother saw he was getting super big, so he was like, he should try out football. So Brandon, he had a good older mentor, Eddie Robinson, who would a member of Brandon's church and was also a part of the Super Church crew, and he was also stayed after the church to play football with Brandon and Pastor Watts. Okay, so Eddie, sadly, he tore the ACL in practice the day before the All-Star game, and he never played football again, sadly. Oh yeah, and he was still a good mentor to Brandon. Brandon went to the All-Star game with his mom when he was a sophomore and got inspired and said he wanted to be a part of this, referring to the All-Star game. Okay, so basically Brandon, he started on the JV team, and one day the varsity coach, he was looking at him and he saw Brandon caught his eye because Brandon was super big. He looked like he had some potential. And basically from what Brandon, he lacked in skill, he made up with it with discipline. He was very smart. He didn't make a lot of mistakes. So Brandon, the JV started offensive line. They were the varsity's like practice squad basically. And Brandon, he got in the weight room in the off season, and he got big and it paid off. And he shared time on the line with a senior that was fine with Brandon because he was on the JV the last year. Okay, quickly, Brandon, he got a lot of awards his senior year. He won Outstanding Player of the Year in Harrison, 2-time All-Conference, and he was an All-Star, and he also made the All-Star team. All right, so these are Brandon's college offers. He had a bunch of small D1 school offers, but his dream growing up was to play for Arkansas, his dream school. So he walked on. Okay, quickly. So Brandon, he had a lot of first team all SEC honors in 1997 and 1998. Let's see, he was also named to the all SEC academic honor roll every year from 1995 to 1998. So basically, okay, so the cool thing about this was Brandon, he had his bachelor degree and master's degree by the time he graduated. And he was the first Arkansas Razorback to do that. All right, this is the last one, I promise you. Okay, so he got drafted in the 3rd round, 63rd by the Colts. And basically he went to their mini camp, and the coaches said he would be penciled in as a starter at the right offensive guard. Sadly, 11 days after Brandon was drafted, he was killed in a car crash on his way back from a post-draft workout at Arkansas in Fayetteville, April 28, 1999. Okay, and this is the real crazy part. Okay, so according to our article, he was supposed to go wedding ring shopping with his girlfriend, but he decided to work out the day instead. So that's just really sad that he did that. Maybe this could be a lot of that. I think that's it. Okay, yeah. So basically, he's an amazing young man who lost his life too soon. And just an interesting fact, I read it out of one of my articles. He drove home every Saturday night to take his mom to church, and he still has an impact on people's lives today, and has countless awards named after the college football today. And he has a youth center. They named the youth center after him in Harris. And this is his locker in Arkansas. After he died, they put his under glass case in their locker room, so all the players can see him when they go in there. All right, that's it.